Hello, everyone. My name is Maya Reed, and I'm 41 years old now. For the longest time, my life was defined by two things: my quiet career as a paralegal in the U.S. Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps, and the long, eclipsing shadow cast by my older sister, Chloe. I never imagined that my grandfather's death, the most painful moment of my life, would lead to a discovery buried for half a century in his old military footlocker. A discovery that would not only upend my family's most cherished beliefs about success and worth, but would also hand me the validation I had stopped fighting for. The battle that followed was quiet, fought with dusty paper and legal precedent instead of weapons, but it was the fight that ultimately defined me. Before I dive into this story of secrets, service, and the surprising power of a forgotten promise, I'd love to know where you all are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like the overlooked one in your family, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. Now let's get into how one little piece of paper changed absolutely everything. Growing up, the universe of our family had two sons. One was a blazing, magnificent star named Chloe, and the other was a distant, barely there satellite named Maya. That was me. Chloe was born dazzling. She was 2 years older, and from the moment she could talk, she charmed every adult in the room. She was precocious, sharp, and had a smile that could disarm a firing squad. Our parents, Richard and Eleanor Reed, were utterly captivated. They saw in her a reflection of all their ambitions, all their hopes for a life shinier and more important than their own comfortable suburban existence. I, on the other hand, was quiet. I was an observer. While Chloe was learning to pirouette in expensive ballet classes, I was sitting with our grandfather, Colonel Samuel Reed, listening to his stories about places with names like Da Nang and Khe Sanh. He never glorified it. He spoke of duty, of the men he served with, of the quiet covenant that exists between soldiers. He was a man carved from granite and integrity, and in a house that buzzed with noise and ambition. His calm was my harbor. He was the only one who seemed to see me. Really see me. The disparity wasn't malicious. Not at first. It was the simple, thoughtless gravity of favoritism. I remember one particular afternoon in 4th grade. I had spent a month building a detailed model of the solar system for the school science fair. It was my masterpiece. I had used my allowance to buy tiny glass marbles for the planets, meticulously painted them, and engineered a system of wires so they would orbit a glowing light bulb sun. I won first prize. I came home clutching a blue ribbon, my heart thrumming with a pride so fierce it felt like it would burst from my chest. I ran into the living room, where my parents and Chloe were sitting. I won. I won first prize, I announced, holding up the ribbon. My mother looked up from the newspaper, a polite smile on her face. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Very nice." My father grunted his approval from behind his armchair, but their attention was immediately pulled away as Chloe waltzed in, waving a piece of paper. "I got a 98 on my history test," she declared. Mr. Albright said it was the best essay in the class. The reaction was electric. My father put down his paper. My mother gasped with delight. "Oh, Chloe, that's incredible. A 98. Richard, did you hear that? Our Chloe is a genius." They fussed over her, praised her, promised her a celebratory dinner at her favorite restaurant. My blue ribbon, and the month of work it represented, lay forgotten on the coffee table. I watched them, a familiar cold ache settling in my stomach. It wasn't the lack of a fancy dinner that hurt. It was the chilling realization of the different scales on which our achievements were weighed. Hers was solid gold, mine was feathers. This pattern repeated itself, etching deeper grooves into our family dynamic with each passing year. When Chloe wanted to attend a prestigious and incredibly expensive pre-law summer camp at Yale, my parents took out a small loan to make it happen. "It's an investment in her future," my father would say, his chest puffed with pride. That same summer, I asked if I could attend a JAG leadership program at a local military base. It cost a fraction of Chloe's camp. My mother's face tightened with concern. "Oh, Maya, Why would you want to do that? All that marching around in the sun. It's so aggressive. It's not for you. It's about discipline and leadership, Mom. I tried to explain. It's not just playing soldier, but they couldn't see it. In their eyes, Chloe's path was paved with ambition and prestige, leading to a corner office and a six-figure salary. My interests were a strange, unladylike detour into a world they didn't understand or value. The only person who did was Grandpa Sam. He drove me to the base himself. On the way, he didn't say much, but he reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Service is a quiet calling, Maya," he said, his voice raspy. "It doesn't scream for attention. It just shows up and does the work. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small for answering it." His words were a balm on the wound of my parents' dismissal. They were a shield I would carry for the rest of my life. Predictably, Chloe soared. She graduated with honors from Georgetown Law and was immediately snapped up by a cutthroat corporate law firm in New York City. The celebratory party my parents threw was the stuff of legend in our quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was filled with flowers, catered food, and beaming relatives, all gathered to toast the ascension of the golden child. Chloe stood in the center of it all, radiant and confident, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving her due. A year later, when I completed my training and was sworn in as a warrant officer, a certified paralegal in the JAG Corps, my parents' reaction was a stark, painful contrast. I called them from my first duty station at Fort Bragg. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, her voice laced with a confusion she tried to mask as enthusiasm. "A paralegal? So you're like a secretary for the Army lawyers?" "It's more than that, Mom," I said, my throat tightening. "I handle legal research, case preparation. I support court-martials. I help soldiers with their legal affairs." "Well, just be safe," my father interjected, his default response to anything involving my career. "Just stay safe." There was no party. No beaming relatives, just a vague, slightly worried acknowledgement of a life choice they would never comprehend. To them, Chloe's success was measured in dollars and billable hours, in penthouse apartments and designer suits. My success was measured in regulations and case files, in service to soldiers who made less in a year than Chloe billed in a week. In their ledger, there was no contest. The last time I saw Grandpa Sam before his final decline, this dynamic was on full, excruciating display. We were all gathered at my parents' house for his 85th birthday. He was frailer than I'd ever seen him, his movements slow, his voice a quiet whisper, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of the quiet wisdom that had always been my anchor. Chloe, of course, was holding court. She had flown in from New York, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. So the opposing counsel tried to bury us in discovery, a classic stall tactic, she was saying, gesticulating with a wine glass. But I pulled 2 all-nighters, found the loophole in the 3rd appendix of the subsidiary agreement, and filed a motion to compel that completely blew their case out of the water. We settled for $12 million. The partners were ecstatic. My parents hung on her every word, their faces glowing with vicarious triumph. $12 million, my father repeated, shaking his head in awe. "That's my girl." Later, I tried to share a small victory of my own. "We had a really rewarding case last week," I started, my voice feeling small in the wake of Chloe's epic tale. A young sergeant, a single dad, was about to deploy, and his ex was trying to use it to get full custody of their kids. It was a mess, but we worked with him, prepared a family care plan that the court accepted, and ensured his parental rights were protected while he was overseas. He was so grateful. My mother patted my hand. "That's so sweet of you, dear, helping the enlisted boys." The condescension was as thick and suffocating as humidity. The term enlisted boys grated on me. They were men and women, soldiers, not children. Chloe let out a little laugh. "Oh, Maya, still fighting the good fight for table scraps. It's cute." She turned back to our father, dismissing me completely. "So, Dad, about that investment portfolio?" I felt myself shrink. It was the same feeling I'd had with the blue ribbon, only magnified by 20 years of reinforcement. I was the cute one, the one with the sweet little hobby of a career, while Chloe was the one doing real work in the real world. I looked across the room and my eyes met Grandpa Sam's. He couldn't speak much, but he didn't need to. He gave me a slow, deliberate wink. It was a tiny gesture, a secret transmission across a room full of noise. It said, "I hear you. I see you. I know what you do matters." I clung to that wink like a life raft. It was the last one he ever gave me. 2 months later, the call came. It was my mother, her voice thick with tears. "He's gone, Maya." Grandpa Sam passed away in his sleep. A profound, hollow silence seemed to fill the world. My anchor was gone. My compass, my true north, had vanished. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I flew home on emergency leave, my uniform neatly packed, my mind a fog of sorrow. The family gathered, cloaked in a shared grief, but even in mourning, the old dynamics reasserted themselves with brutal efficiency. Chloe, ever the executive, immediately took charge. While I was lost in memories of my grandfather's quiet strength, she was on the phone with caterers, florists, and my father's lawyer. "We need to be practical," she announced to my parents, who seemed relieved to hand over the reins. "There are arrangements to be made. The estate needs to be handled." The word estate hung in the air, cold and sharp. It felt profane to be talking about assets and property when the man who had accumulated them was barely cold. But for Chloe, and by extension, my parents, it was the next logical step. The business of death was, after all, still business, and business was Chloe's world. The reading of the will was scheduled for the day after the funeral. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking. The army sent an honor guard, and the sharp crack of the rifle salute and the mournful notes of tapsits echoed across the cemetery, a final fitting tribute to a life of service. I clutched the folded flag they presented to me, the cloth stiff and sacred in my hands, and felt a grief so profound it was almost peaceful. For a few hours we were just a family mourning a patriarch, but the peace was fleeting. The next morning we sat in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Mr. Henderson, our family's longtime lawyer. He was a man who looked like he had been born in a three-piece suit, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. My parents sat on a leather sofa, looking drained. Chloe sat in a wingback chair opposite Henderson's desk, her posture perfect, a leather portfolio resting in her lap. She looked less like a grieving granddaughter and more like a CEO at a board meeting. I took a smaller chair off to the side, feeling like an afterthought, an extra in a scene where I was supposed to be a principal. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and put on a pair of reading glasses. "Well, we're all here," he began, his voice oozing practiced sympathy. "Sam was a wonderful man, a pillar of the community. He made his wishes very clear in his last will and testament, which I helped him draft 2 years ago." He picked up a document bound in a neat blue cover. "It's quite straightforward. He wanted to ensure his legacy was in the most capable hands." My stomach twisted. I knew what was coming. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of messaging. Chloe was capable. I was sweet. Henderson began to read in a dry monotone. There were a few small bequests to charities, a token amount to a distant cousin. Then he got to the main clause. "And as for the rest and residue of my estate, both real and personal, including my home, my investments, and all personal effects, I give, devise, and bequeath entirely and without condition to my beloved granddaughter, Chloe Reed." The words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't the loss of a house or money that stunned me. It was the total, absolute erasure. It was a final, posthumous verdict from the one person I thought truly saw me. And the verdict was, "You do not count." The last 20 years of my life, the path of service I had chosen because of him, had been wiped away by a single sentence. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch meant to be comforting but feeling like a pat of pity. "He knew Chloe had the best head for business, honey," she whispered, as if that would somehow soothe the gaping wound that had just been torn open in my soul. "It's a practical decision. He trusted her to manage things." My father nodded in agreement. That's right. Your grandfather was a practical man. Chloe, for her part, put on a masterclass performance of humble gravitas. She dabbed a tear from the corner of her eye with a delicate finger. "Oh, Grandpa," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down. I promise I'll take care of everything." She looked up, her expression shifting from grieving to efficient in a heartbeat. "Mr. Henderson, we should probably talk about listing the house as soon as possible. The market is strong right now, and it's far too much upkeep for any one person." I just sat there, numb and silent. I felt frozen, encased in a block of ice. What could I say? Argue? Scream that it wasn't fair? That it wasn't about the money but about the meaning? They wouldn't understand. To them, this was a perfectly logical, almost beautiful conclusion. The family legacy, secured in the hands of the successful one. My own success, the kind Grandpa Sam had taught me to value, quiet, dutiful, selfless, had been deemed worthless. In my family's court of opinion, and now, apparently, in the eyes of the law, my entire life had been overruled. My silence in that moment was a flaw, a weakness born of shock and a lifetime of being conditioned to accept my secondary status. I didn't fight. I didn't protest. I just nodded, letting the injustice wash over me, and in doing so I let them believe they were right. In the days that followed, the house became a hub of brisk, unsentimental activity. Chloe was a whirlwind of efficiency. She had appraisers come for the antique furniture, realtors to assess the property value, and estate sale organizers to tag every object with a price. My parents followed in her wake, nodding and agreeing, impressed by her command of the situation. The home that had been filled with the scent of Grandpa Sam's pipe tobacco and the weight of his quiet presence was being dismantled, its soul itemized and prepared for liquidation. I couldn't bear to watch it. I felt like a ghost in my own family history. So when Chloe, in a moment of magnanimous delegation, assigned me a task, I accepted it with a strange sense of relief. "Maya," she said, not looking up from a spreadsheet on her laptop. "The funeral home needs a good photo of Grandpa for the memorial program. And they need his service details for the military honors. DD 214, that sort of thing. You know all about that stuff. Could you handle it? I'm just swamped with all the important financial paperwork." The condescension was subtle but sharp. "You handle the sentimental trinkets while I handle the real power." My parents chimed in immediately. "Oh, that's a perfect job for Maya," my mother said. "You were always so close to your grandfather's military side." It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like being handed a consolation prize. You don't get the inheritance, but you get to be the keeper of the dusty memories. Fine. At that moment, I would have rather had the dust than the dollars. It was an excuse to escape the cloying atmosphere of the main house and retreat into the one place that still felt sacred, my grandfather's study. Pushing open the heavy oak door to his study was like stepping back in time. The air was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of old paper, leather, and the faint, sweet aroma of the cherry blend tobacco he'd favored. Nothing had been touched yet. His reading glasses lay on an open book on his desk. A half-finished crossword puzzle sat nearby. It was a perfect, painful time capsule. For a long moment I just stood in the doorway, letting the quiet of the room settle over me. This was my real inheritance, I thought. This feeling, this connection to him. My task was to find his official military records. I knew where he kept them. In the corner of the room stood a heavy, olive-drab army footlocker, the same one he'd carried with him to Vietnam. His name, Reed, S.J., was stenciled in faded white paint on the top. I knelt on the floor and lifted the heavy lid. The smell of canvas and time washed over me. Inside, everything was organized with military precision. His dress uniform was folded neatly on top, encased in a plastic protector. Beneath it were thick manila folders, meticulously labeled service records, commendations, promotion orders, medical. I pulled out the service records folder to find his DD 214, the official certificate of release from active duty. But my mission to find a photo felt secondary to a deeper need to just be with him, to sift through the artifacts of his life. I spent hours on the floor of that study, cross-legged, surrounded by the paper trail of a life well lived. I found photographs of a handsome young man in uniform, his jaw set with determination, his eyes full of a fire I'd only ever seen as embers. I read letters of commendation for bravery and leadership. I found his promotion warrants, each one marking a step up in a career dedicated to his country. I felt a swell of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This was the man they were reducing to a series of assets on a spreadsheet. Deeper in the footlocker, under a stack of old Stars and Stripes newspapers, I found a small, worn, leather-bound Bible. Its cover was soft and frayed at the edges. I knew this Bible. He used to keep it on his nightstand. I ran my thumb over the gilded, faded letters of his name, embossed on the cover. I opened it, and the pages fell open to the Psalms, his favorite book. Tucked between the thin, delicate pages was a bundle of letters, tied together with a faded red ribbon. They were written on thin, foldable V-mail stationery, the kind used by soldiers overseas during the war. My heart gave a little lurch. These were his letters home to his own parents, written from the heart of the conflict. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably his, but younger, more forceful. The ink was faded to a brownish sepia. I read one. It was about the monsoon rains, the endless mud, and the camaraderie he shared with the men in his platoon. It was intimate and real, a window into the soul of the young man who would become my grandfather. I felt like a privileged intruder, but I couldn't stop. I was carefully placing the letters back into a neat stack when I noticed one last item still tucked inside the Bible's back cover. It was a single blue airmail envelope, the kind with the red and blue striped border. It was unsealed. Curious, I slid out the single, folded sheet of paper inside. It was the same V-mail stationery as the other letters. I unfolded it, expecting another dispatch about life in the jungle. But the first words made me freeze. To be opened only in the event of my death. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a letter home. I scanned the page, my eyes flying over his neat, controlled script. The language was stark and formal, completely different from the conversational tone of the other letters. I, Sergeant Samuel J. Reed, being of sound mind and body, though in full awareness of the perils of my current station in the Republic of Vietnam, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. My heart started to pound, a heavy, frantic drum against my ribs. I read on. He made a few small provisions, leaving his service rifle to his best friend, his medals to his father, and then came the core of it, the words that would change everything. All the rest of my property, both real and personal, of whatever kind and wherever situated, I bequeath to the future child of my son Richard Reed, who chooses to build a life upon the principle of service to our nation, rather than a life built upon the pursuit of personal profit and acclaim. I had to read it 3 times. The words seemed to shimmer on the page. At the time he wrote this, my father was just a teenager. Neither Chloe nor I had even been conceived. It was a statement of principle, a legacy aimed at a future he wasn't sure he would live to see. As if anticipating the ambiguity, he had added a clarifying sentence, a line that felt like a lightning bolt straight to my heart. Should one grandchild follow a path of selfless duty, and the other a path of commercial ambition, my entire legacy is intended for the one who understands the values upon which it was built. Let there be no confusion on this point. At the bottom of the page was his full formal signature, and a date, May 17, 1968. My JAG training, all those years of studying legal documents, of learning to spot anomalies, of understanding the fine print, all of it came rushing to the forefront of my mind. This wasn't just a wish. This was a legal instrument. I checked the mental boxes, entirely in the testator's handwriting. Yes, signed by the testator. Yes, shows clear testamentary intent. Absolutely. This was a holographic will. And in many states, especially with considerations for soldiers in active combat zones under what was historically known as the Soldiers and Sailors' Wills Act, a document like this was perfectly legally valid. I sat back on my heels, the fragile paper shaking in my hand. The study, which had been a place of quiet grief, was now buzzing with a new, powerful energy. This piece of paper was his real voice, not the voice of an old man, perhaps frail and easily influenced, who had signed a document 2 years ago. This was the voice of a 25-year-old Sergeant Sam Reed, facing his own mortality every single day, writing down what truly mattered to him. It was a time bomb of intent, set half a century ago, and I had just stumbled upon it. It wasn't a rejection of Chloe. It was a validation of me. It was a validation of my quiet, unimpressive career. It was a validation of every time I chose duty over dollars, service over status. He had seen me all those years ago before I even existed. He had written a legacy for a granddaughter he had only dared to hope for. A slow, fierce joy began to burn through the numbness and the grief. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. For the next 24 hours, I lived and breathed probate law. I didn't sleep. Fueled by coffee and a righteous fire I hadn't felt in years, I turned my temporary bedroom at my parents' house into a makeshift legal office. I used my Army-issued laptop to dive into my state statutes, cross-referencing them with federal military law and case precedents. I printed out articles, highlighted legal codes, and built a case file with the same meticulous care I would for a court-martial. The law was on my side. Holographic wills, while less common now, were still recognized. The key was proving authenticity and intent. The authenticity was undeniable. I knew my grandfather's handwriting better than my own. The intent was spelled out in language, so clear and powerful it was like a beacon. The fact that it was created in a combat zone gave it even more weight. This wasn't just some dusty old letter, as I knew Chloe would inevitably call it. It was a soldier's final wish, a sacred class of document in the eyes of the law. I called my direct superior, Major Thompson, a seasoned JAG attorney I respected immensely. I explained the situation, reading the will to him over the phone. He was silent for a long moment. "Reed," he said finally, his voice serious, "you've got a live one. That's not just a will, that's a declaration. It's solid. Don't let any civilian suit bully you. The provenance is powerful." His confidence was the final piece of armor I needed. The day of the final signing arrived. It was a cold, gray morning that matched the mood in my heart. The meeting was set for 10 o'clock at Mr. Henderson's office. Chloe called me that morning. "Maya, please try not to be too emotional today," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "I know this is hard for you, but it's what Grandpa wanted. Let's just get it over with smoothly." "I'll be there, Chloe," I'd said, my voice unnaturally calm. I had the holographic will in a protective archival sleeve, tucked securely inside my leather briefcase. Alongside it were my printed-out legal citations and a neatly typed summary of my argument. I was no longer the grieving, invisible little sister. I was a JAG paralegal with a mission. I walked into the conference room to the same scene as before. Mr. Henderson at the head of the polished mahogany table, my parents looking somber and uncomfortable on the sofa, and Chloe, perfectly poised in her power suit, looking at her watch, as if we were all wasting her valuable time. She gave me a tight, impatient smile. "Glad you could make it." I took my seat, placing my briefcase on the floor beside me. The room was thick with a funereal silence. "Well then," Mr. Henderson began, rubbing his hands together. "A difficult day, but we must proceed. This is just a formality, really. Signing the papers to allow Chloe, as the executor and sole beneficiary, to formally petition the court and begin the probate process." He slid a thick stack of documents toward Chloe, along with a fancy fountain pen. "All right, Chloe. If you'll just sign here, here, and here." Chloe picked up the pen. The moment was here. The final nail in the coffin of my grandfather's true intent. "Wait." The word came out of me, quiet but carrying the weight of a command. It sliced through the silence of the room. Every head turned to me. Chloe froze, the pen hovering over the paper. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of shock and profound annoyance. "Maya, what is it now?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Can we please not drag this out? We're trying to get this done." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Maya, honey, let's not make a scene." I took a deep, steadying breath. I reached down, clicked open my briefcase, and pulled out the archival sleeve containing the V-mail. I placed it gently on the center of the polished table. "I don't believe this document," I said, nodding toward the stack of papers in front of Chloe. "Represents the testator's final and operative will." Mr. Henderson stared at the blue airmail envelope as if I'd placed a live snake on his table. He peered at it over his glasses. "What is this?" Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, what have you found, Maya? Some old love letter? This is pathetic. You're upset you were left out, and now you're inventing a fantasy to make yourself feel better." Her words were designed to sting, to humiliate me into silence. A month ago they would have worked, but I wasn't the same person who had sat numbly in this room before. I looked her directly in the eye, my gaze steady. "It's a holographic will," I stated simply, "written by Sergeant Samuel Reed on May 17, 1968, from his post in Vietnam." Henderson finally picked it up, handling the sleeve with a certain distaste. He slid the document out and began to read. His skeptical expression slowly morphed into one of confusion, then alarm. Chloe scoffed, leaning back in her chair with an air of theatrical boredom. "Mr. Henderson, please don't indulge this. It's a piece of paper from 50 years ago. It means nothing. The current will, the one you drafted, is legally binding. Leave the law to the actual lawyers." Little sister. That was it. The ultimate dismissal. The final pat on the head. And in that moment, something inside me broke free. Not in a shower of angry sparks, but with the clean, quiet snap of a chain that has been under tension for too long. "My profession is not on trial here, Chloe," I said, my voice level and cold. "The law is. And the law in this state, specifically Statute 3B-3.2, recognizes holographic wills as valid testamentary instruments, provided they meet certain criteria." I started ticking them off on my fingers. "It must be written entirely in the testator's hand. It must be signed. It must demonstrate clear testamentary intent. It does." Furthermore, I continued, my confidence building with every word, "there is a long and respected legal tradition, reinforced by numerous precedents, of giving special consideration to the testamentary wishes of soldiers serving in a combat zone." I opened my briefcase again and pulled out my file. "I have the relevant case law right here, if you'd like to review it, Mr. Henderson. In Re Estate of Johnson, 1982, upholds a will written on a ration box. Smith v. Jones, 1975, validates a testament written in a diary. This document is a subsequent testamentary instrument, and if it is validated by the court, it revokes all previous wills, including the one you're about to execute." The color drained from Chloe's face. Her smug superiority was gone, replaced by a flickering panic in her eyes. "This is insane. You're a paralegal, Maya, a glorified secretary in a uniform. You don't know what you're talking about." "My uniform," I said, my voice dropping, "is the very reason I understand the context of this document. It's the reason I was the one sorting through his service records. And it's the reason Grandpa Sam wrote this will the way he did. He trusted that someone who understood the meaning of that uniform would one day find it and know its worth." I turned my full attention to the lawyer, who was now pale and sweating slightly. "Mr. Henderson, I am formally notifying you, as an officer of the court, of the existence of this document. I intend to submit it to the probate court for validation as the true last will and testament of Colonel Samuel Reed. If you were to proceed with the probate of the 2018 will without disclosing this discovery to the court, you would be perpetrating a fraud upon the court. I am sure you, as a member of the State Bar, are fully aware of the severe professional consequences of such an action." The threat was not veiled. It was a direct, tactical strike. Henderson dropped the document back on the table as if it were radioactive. The pompous, patronizing lawyer was gone. In his place was a man who saw his career flashing before his eyes. "I will, of course, need to review this," he stammered, his composure shattered. "This changes things. We cannot proceed today." Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. For the first time in our lives, she was speechless. The queen had been checkmated by a pawn she never even saw as a piece on the board. My parents looked back and forth between us, their faces a canvas of utter bewilderment. They didn't understand the legal nuances, but they understood the shift in power. It was as palpable as a change in barometric pressure. The air in the room had changed. Everything had changed. The fallout from that meeting was immediate and explosive. Chloe stormed out of Henderson's office without another word, a furious, humiliated storm cloud in a designer suit. My parents scurried after her, clucking and cooing, trying to manage a situation that had spiraled far beyond their control. My father paused at the door, turning back to me with a look of pained confusion. "Maya, was all that really necessary? In front of everyone?" "It was necessary to honor Grandpa's true wishes, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. "That's all I'm trying to do." I packed my briefcase with a calm I didn't entirely feel, and walked out of that office with my head held high. The battle was far from over, but I had won the first, most important engagement. I had found my voice. As expected, Chloe did not take it lying down. Within a week, I received a letter from a high-powered, astronomically expensive law firm in the city. They were representing Chloe, and would be formally contesting the validity of the so-called holographic will. Their letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, arguing that the document was merely a youthful, sentimental letter with no legal standing, that it had been superseded by the professionally drafted 2018 will, and that my amateur interpretation was a desperate, grief-fueled fantasy. They underestimated me. They saw a small-town paralegal. They didn't see the discipline of the United States Army behind me. I didn't need an expensive law firm. I had the truth, and I had my training. The probate court set a hearing date. The fight was on. This is where my quiet, meticulous nature, the very trait my family had always overlooked, became my greatest weapon. I knew the will itself was strong, but I needed to buttress it with corroborating evidence of my grandfather's intent, so I went back to the footlocker. I spent days sifting through every piece of paper, every letter, every note, and I found it. In another bundle of letters to a cousin, written in the same period, he mentioned it. "The fighting is getting worse," he wrote. "I've made sure my affairs are in order, hidden away in my Bible. A man has to be prepared." It was another small piece of the puzzle, reinforcing his testamentary intent. But the real breakthrough came from a different kind of research. I went through his old address books, looking for names from his platoon. So many were gone, lost either in the war or to time. But one name, Corporal Frank Miller, had a recent address listed at a VA retirement home just 2 states over. I took a day of leave and drove there. I found Frank in a sunny community room, a cantankerous old man with eyes that still held a mischievous spark. When I introduced myself as Sam Reed's granddaughter, his face broke into a wide, warm smile. We talked for hours. He told me stories about my grandfather that I'd never heard, about his courage, his humor, his unwavering sense of decency. Then I took a chance. "Frank," I asked, my heart in my throat, "do you remember Grandpa ever talking about a will, about what he wanted to happen if he didn't make it back?" Frank's eyes unfocused for a moment. Looking back across 50 years, he nodded slowly. Yeah, I remember. We all talked about it. Morbid stuff, but you had to." Sam was different, though. He didn't trust the Army's official forms, said they were too generic. He chuckled. He told me he wrote his own, proper-like, on that blue airmail paper. Said he was putting his faith in the future. He stuck it in his Bible. Said that way God and his family would both know what he wanted. He was real proud of it. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. This was it. This was the living testimony that connected all the dots. Frank agreed to provide a sworn affidavit, and if necessary, to testify. The case was now ironclad. During this time, the dynamic with my parents began a slow, painful shift. At first, they were firmly in Chloe's camp, embarrassed by my actions and frustrated by the mess I was making. But as the legal battle dragged on, they started to see a side of Chloe they had long ignored. They saw her raw, undisguised greed, her willingness to trample on her grandfather's memory to get what she wanted. Her phone calls to them weren't about grief or family. They were strategy sessions, complaints about legal fees, and angry tirades against me. One evening, they showed up at the little motel where I was staying. They looked tired and defeated. My mother was holding a small stack of the V-mail letters I had left on the desk in the study. We read some of these," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We never knew. He never talked about any of this." They had only ever seen the successful colonel, the pillar of the community. They had never met the terrified 25-year-old sergeant, riding home from a world of mud and fear, clinging to principles as his only anchor. For the first time, they sat and listened. I told them about my conversation with Frank Miller. I explained the legal significance of the will. I didn't try to convince them, I just laid out the facts. I could see the dawning realization in their eyes, the painful recalibration of a lifetime of beliefs. They were finally seeing the man their father was, not just the successful figurehead they had admired. And in doing so, they were finally truly beginning to see me. The day of the probate hearing was surreal. The courtroom was small and formal. I sat at one table, representing myself. Across the aisle, Chloe sat with two expensive-looking lawyers who radiated an aura of smug confidence. My parents sat in the back, silent observers in a war between their own children. Chloe's lawyer went first, painting a picture of me as an unstable, emotional woman, spurned by a legitimate will, and now clinging to a piece of wartime memorabilia. They called me a mere paralegal at least 5 times. When it was my turn, I didn't use rhetoric. I used evidence. I presented the will. I presented the letters corroborating my grandfather's intent. I submitted Frank Miller's sworn affidavit. I calmly and methodically cited the state statutes and the relevant case law, my voice never shaking. I wasn't arguing from a place of emotion anymore. I was arguing from a place of fact. The judge, an older woman with a stern but patient face, listened to everything without expression. She examined the will herself, holding it carefully. She read Frank's affidavit twice. When all arguments were made, she looked out over the courtroom. The last will of a soldier, written in a time of war, is a particularly solemn document, she began, her voice ringing with authority. It is a message sent from the gravest of circumstances, and the law has long held that we must make every effort to honor its intent. She looked directly at Chloe and her lawyers. The argument that this document is mere sentimentality is unconvincing. The language is clearly testamentary. The argument that it was revoked by a subsequent will is also flawed, as the testator's intent, as expressed in this holographic will, appears to be fundamentally at odds with the simpler later document. This court is further persuaded by the powerful testimony of Corporal Miller, who confirms the testator's intent at the time of its creation. She paused, and her gaze fell on me. Therefore it is the ruling of this court that the holographic will dated May 17, 1968, is the true and valid last will and testament of Samuel J. Reed. A gavel fell with a sharp, final crack. It was over. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Chloe's face was a mask of disbelief. Her perfect composure shattered into a million pieces. Her lawyers were shuffling papers, avoiding her eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It wasn't a feeling of triumph. Not exactly. It was a feeling of profound, quiet rightness. Justice, after 50 years, had been served. In the aftermath of the court's decision, I made a choice. The legacy my grandfather had left me wasn't about the money or the property. It was about the principle. The first thing I did was halt the estate sale. I walked through the house, my house now, and removed every single price tag. I told the realtor the property was no longer for sale. I would not be liquidating my grandfather's life. I would be preserving it. I decided to move in. I left my small apartment near the base and made my grandfather's house my home. His study remained untouched, a perfect sanctuary of memory and peace. Living there felt like a continuation of a long conversation, a way to honor the man who had believed in a version of me I hadn't yet become. The financial assets, the stocks and bonds that Chloe had been so eager to manage, were considerable. But I knew what I had to do. After setting aside enough to secure my own future, I worked with a financial advisor and a lawyer, a real one this time, one I chose to establish the Colonel Samuel Reed Service Scholarship Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide educational grants for the children and grandchildren of military families, people who, like me, had chosen a path of service. It was the only way to truly fulfill the intent of his will, to use his legacy to foster the very value he cherished most. My relationship with my family was irrevocably altered. Chloe was devastated, not just by the loss of the inheritance, but by the public humiliation. The court's decision was a stark, official repudiation of the narrative she had built her entire life around. She retreated into a bitter, angry silence. A few months later, she sent me a stilted, formal email that was less an apology and more a demand for rapprochement. It was clear she was motivated by a desire to regain some connection to the family legacy she now saw me controlling. I wrote back, keeping it brief and clear. "Chloe," I wrote, "I'm not angry with you, but I can't go back to the way things were. The relationship we had was built on a dynamic that no longer exists. I wish you peace, and I hope you can find a way to build a life that makes you happy, for reasons that have nothing to do with inheritances or what other people think." I was setting a boundary, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Forgiveness might come one day, but trust was a different matter entirely. My parents were the biggest surprise. The court case had forced them to look at their own values, and they were shaken by what they saw. They had spent their lives cheering for the shiny, loud version of success, completely missing the quiet, profound value of the life I had built, the life their own father had championed. One Sunday, they came over for dinner. It was the first time they had been to the house since I moved in. The evening was awkward at first, filled with unspoken things. We sat at the old dining table, the same one where I had been dismissed and ignored so many times. But this time, it was different. My father cleared his throat, his eyes on his plate. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we were wrong. Your mother and I, we were so proud of Chloe's success, we were blind. We didn't see you. We didn't see that your grandfather's legacy wasn't in his bank account. It was in his character. A character you share." My mother was crying softly. "We are so sorry," she whispered. "And so proud of the woman you've become." It was the apology I had unknowingly waited my entire life to hear. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it opened a door to a new kind of relationship, one built not on performance and expectation, but on honesty and a newfound respect. We were finally starting to become a real family. Years have passed since that day in court. I'm still a paralegal in the JAG Corps, now a chief warrant officer, mentoring young soldiers and finding deep satisfaction in my work. The foundation in my grandfather's name has helped dozens of students go to college. His house is filled with life and love. My relationship with my parents is quiet and steady, healed and stronger than it ever was. I hear from Chloe on holidays, a brief, polite card. I hope she has found her peace. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my grandfather's study, the faint scent of old books and cherry tobacco still hanging in the air. I look at the framed V-mail will on the wall. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a map. It was a message from a young man in a war zone to a granddaughter he would never meet, telling her that her quiet path had value, that service was a legacy in itself, and that true worth is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It has to be found within. That discovery, that truth, is the greatest inheritance of all. The most important lesson I learned through all of this is that your value is inherent. It isn't determined by your parents, your siblings, or your salary. It is defined by your character, your integrity, and the choices you make when no one is watching. Being underestimated can feel like a curse, but sometimes it's a hidden superpower. It allows you to grow in the shadows, to build a strength and a resolve that will shock everyone when you finally decide to step into the light. I would love to hear from you all in the comments. Have you ever had to fight to be seen by your own family? Share your story below because every story shared helps someone else feel less alone. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories of vindication and empowerment. Remember that you get to define your own success. Family is not just about blood, it's about who sees you, who supports you, and who honors the truth of who you are. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I wish you all strength on your own journeys.